The blood on the snow looked unnaturally bright. Gregory Stevens froze, his gaze fixed on the broken crimson trail of paw prints leading deep into the dark green mass of the Pacific Northwest forests. His heart skipped a beat when, from behind the trunk of a mighty cedar tree she appeared, a massive cougar with a bleeding flank. Carefully, the predator held a tiny, fluffy bundle in her jaws. Their eyes met. There was no savage snarl, no threatening growl, only a plea in her amber eyes. The park ranger instinctively lowered his rifle. The cougar, as if she had been waiting for just that, gently placed her cub on the flattened snow and, with one last look at Gregory, disappeared among the trees. Only the red stains on the snow marked her retreat. "Well, I'm in for it now," Gregory Stevens whispered, slowly approaching the whimpering cub. "What am I supposed to do with you?" The fact that the fearsome queen of the wilderness had entrusted her offspring to him, a human, seemed incredible. Yet it had just happened before his eyes on a frosty February morning in 2008, at the edge of the woods near the small settlement of Timber Ridge. Before we begin, please tell us where you're from. Subscribe, hit like, and watch to the end. Here we go. So you just picked up a cub and brought it home? Elena, Gregory Stevens' granddaughter, settled onto an old, worn armchair. Pulling her legs up beneath her, her blue eyes, as bright as her mother's, watched with unconcealed admiration. "No way! You're making this up, Grandpa." "It happened, all right," Gregory Stevens chuckled, rubbing his gray stubble. At 72, he was still sturdy and fit. The years of living in the wilderness had kept him that way. Only, it's not a story, it's the honest truth. And what happened next? The girl leaned closer. Next? Gregory Stevens closed his eyes, immersing himself in the events of 15 years ago. Then a completely different life began. Gregory Lawton had never planned on being a recluse. In his youth, he served in the Border Patrol, then worked as a game warden in the Pacific Northwest, before becoming a senior park ranger. He married a local beauty, Patricia, and built a sturdy house on the outskirts of Timber Ridge, where civilization met the wild. Patricia passed away suddenly. A stroke was not uncommon for women in these parts. Doctors often mentioned something about iodine deficiency, environmental factors, and limited medical access. But did any of that matter when the world fell out from under your feet? By then his daughter Shirley was already studying in Seattle, then married and moved to Portland. Visits were rare. Distances were no joke. Solitude didn't scare Gregory. He actually rather liked it. His work at the park demanded complete dedication. He had to monitor logging, ensure fire safety, track down poachers, and educate visiting hunters who believed money could buy them access to the treasures of the wilderness. While patrolling his extensive section of the woods, Gregory often stumbled upon tracks of large predators, bears and cougars. Several hundred cougars remained in the Pacific Northwest, and an encounter with them was considered a rare stroke of luck for photographers and biologists. Locals, however, feared them, though they respected them. Old Man Joseph, from the local First Nations community, often said that the cougar was the spirit of the wilderness, and killing one brought a curse upon an entire family line. On that February day, Gregory had gone to check the southern section. There had been a report of suspicious individuals, possibly poachers. Previously, snares for wild boar had been found in that area. After walking several miles along the snowy trail, he noticed strange tracks. A large cat, was moving unevenly, as if injured. Following such tracks was the height of recklessness, but something inside told him he had to. That's how he came upon the injured cougar with her cub, who entrusted him with the most precious thing she had. "I named her Timber," Gregory Stevens said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "She turned out to be a feisty girl, full of spirit." "Timber? Like the forest?" Elena began. "Yes, like our woods here," Grandpa nodded. "Wild, beautiful, unpredictable." He paused, sipping tea from a chipped enamel mug. Outside, the wilderness rustled, his faithful companion all these years. "At first, I wanted to take the cub to a rehabilitation center in Fairbanks," the park ranger continued. "I even called my friend William, who was a research scientist there." "And why didn't you?" Elena hugged her knees, ready to listen. "William told me what I already knew. A blind cub had little chance of survival in a sanctuary. Such young ones need special care. Besides," Gregory Stevens lowered his voice, "that center was constantly monitored, and this was an unusual case. What if the mother cougar came back for her cub? I decided to keep her for a while, and then see." "And you didn't tell anyone? Not even your superiors?" "No one." Gregory shook his head. "In this business, extra ears are a liability. What if someone found out? We had folks around here who loved getting cougar pelts." The first few days with the cub were not easy for Gregory Stevens. The cub was tiny, weighing no more than 4 pounds, and her eyes hadn't opened yet. He had to recall how they fed his daughter as an infant and improvise. "I tried everything," Gregory recounted years later. "I diluted goat's milk and bought infant formula. At first I fed her with an eyedropper, then I adapted a bottle nipple. Timber turned out to be lively and stubborn. After a week, her eyes opened, bright blue, as they are for all cougar cubs. She meowed demandingly when hungry and would only fall asleep on his chest, listening to the beat of his heart. At work, Gregory Stevens lied that he was ill. Fortunately, winter was a quiet season for the Park Service, and his temporary absence didn't raise much suspicion. He dedicated all of February to nursing the cub. Little Timber quickly grew accustomed to the human dwelling and to her rescuer. "Can you imagine, Elena? She thought I was her mother," Grandpa chuckled. "She'd wag her stumpy tail like a little dog whenever I came home." Gregory understood that he couldn't hide the cub's presence in the house for long. Timber Ridge, though small, with only a few hundred residents, was a place where rumors spread faster than a forest fire. He needed someone he could trust. That person turned out to be his old friend and comrade from the Border Patrol, Robert Graham, a retired major who had also settled in Timber Ridge after leaving the service and worked as a wildlife officer. "Gregory, are you out of your mind?" was all Robert could manage when he saw the cub frolicking on the kitchen floor. That's... "This is Timber," Gregory answered calmly, "and I need your help." "And then Robert and I organized a real secret operation." Gregory Stevens winked at his granddaughter. "We called it the Cougar Kindergarten." "What do you mean?" Elena didn't understand. "A kindergarten for cougars?" "Not exactly," Grandpa laughed. "We decided it was too risky to keep the cub in the house, and it wasn't right for Timber herself. She needed to learn to be a cougar, not a house cat. Robert suggested setting up a safe enclosure on his property. His house was even further from the center of town, almost in the woods with no neighbors. We made something like a mini sanctuary there." "And no one found out?" "Some people did." Gregory Stevens' face grew serious, and that's when the real problems began. Within 3 months, Timber had transformed from a helpless kitten into a playful but already quite strong cub. She weighed almost 40 pounds and loved to play chase with Gregory and Robert. In the makeshift enclosure, the size of a football field, which the men had set up in Robert's backyard, the cougar had plenty of room to run and explore. Gregory visited her every day after work, bringing fresh meat, boar, venison, or chicken, playing and watching his unusual charge grow. He could only guess what had happened to her mother. Everything changed at the end of May, when federal wildlife agents descended upon the town. Someone had reported seeing cougars in the area, and now the wildlife officials wanted to find out if a new cougar family had appeared in the region requiring observation and protection. Robert was the first to notice the strangers and warned Gregory. "We have visitors, Gregory," he said, looking into his park office. "2 in uniform, 1 in plain clothes from the city by the looks of it. They're asking the locals about cougars." Gregory frowned. The inspection itself wasn't frightening, if not for Timber. The appearance of a young cougar in an unnatural environment would immediately raise questions. Moreover, keeping an endangered animal without special permits was a criminal offense. "We need to hide her," Gregory decided, "tonight." They moved the grown cub deeper into the wilderness, to an abandoned hunting cabin located 20 miles from town. The transport was a nightmare. They had to temporarily sedate Timber with a veterinary tranquilizer Robert had gotten through connections, and transport her on an ATV wrapped in a tarp. "Gregory, maybe we should just turn her over officially," Robert suggested when they had settled the cougar in her new location. "They'll find out sooner or later, and then we'll be in serious trouble." "No," Gregory Stevens replied firmly. "I gave her mother my word that I'd look after the little one, and to give her to a sanctuary is like signing her death warrant. You know how underfunded they are, and there are many orphaned cougar cubs there, but few specialists." Robert just sighed. He knew it was useless to argue with the stubborn Lawton. Meanwhile, events were unfolding back in town that Gregory only learned about afterward. The arriving wildlife agents weren't just gathering information, they were investigating a poaching incident. The remains of a killed cougar had been found in a neighboring district, and suspicion had fallen on a group of hunters from Timber Ridge. The investigation was led by a young but already proven inspector, Alan Carter. He methodically questioned locals, gathering information about suspicious individuals and strange occurrences in the wilderness. One of the town residents, Nathaniel Burke, a local mechanic and known enthusiast of illegal hunting, became nervous after the investigators appeared. It was he and 2 friends who had tracked the cougar family in February and shot the mother cougar. Now, fearing exposure, Burke decided to divert suspicion from himself and hinted to Carter that Ranger Lawton might have interesting information. Carter paid Gregory Stevens a visit at the end of May. By then, Timber was safely hidden in the forest cabin, and the ranger felt relatively at ease. "Mr. Lawton," Carter began officially, sitting at the table in the park office, "we have information about poaching activity in your area. In February of this year, a female cougar with cubs was shot. Do you know anything about this incident?" Gregory remained impassive, though his stomach churned. So his suspicions about Timber's mother's fate were confirmed. "I haven't received any reports of poaching," he replied dryly, but I will certainly inform you if I learn anything." "And what about the rumors of a cub supposedly seen in town?" Carter looked him directly in the eye. Gregory met his gaze. "Young man," he chuckled, "in these wilderness towns you see all sorts of things every spring. Bigfoot, gnomes, UFOs. Now, it seems someone imagined a cub." Carter didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. As he left, he handed Gregory his business card. "If you recall anything important, call any time." When the inspector left, Gregory immediately called Robert. "We have problems," was all he said. "And what happened to Burke?" Elena even half stood up, full of excitement. "Was he the one who killed the cougar, Timber's mother?" "Patience, granddaughter." Gregory Stevens looked at his watch. "It's getting late. Maybe that's enough for today?" "Grandpa," Elena exclaimed, "you can't stop at the most exciting part." The old park ranger smirked. All right. Listen closely. What happened next was like a detective story." Burke and his cronies turned out to be craftier than Gregory had anticipated. Without direct evidence, Carter was forced to return to Seattle empty-handed. But the town was already buzzing. Someone had indeed seen a cub on Robert's property, and now rumors multiplied and grew with fantastic details. That evening, 2 days after the inspector's departure, Gregory heard a strange noise in his yard. Looking out the window, he noticed a human shadow flitting near the shed. Grabbing his rifle, the park ranger rushed out onto the porch. "Stop! Who's there?" The figure darted toward the fence and disappeared into the darkness. Gregory walked around the yard with a flashlight and found signs of forced entry on the shed door. Inside, everything was turned upside down, as if someone was looking for something, or someone. The next day, he went to check on Timber. The cabin was in a remote area, reachable only by ATV or on foot, if you knew the way. But he was still uneasy. Timber greeted him with a joyful roar. At 5 months, she no longer meowed, but made sounds more like an adult cougar. She had grown stronger, her fur a rich orange with distinct black stripes. Recognizing Gregory, the cougar ran up and rubbed against his legs, nearly knocking him over. "Easy, beautiful, easy," Gregory said gently, scratching behind her ear. "Soon you'll have to learn to live on your own." He left her fresh prey, a young wild boar he had shot on the way. Timber attacked the meat with gusto, displaying increasingly predatory instincts. Returning home, Gregory noticed fresh tire tracks near the forest trail. Someone else had been in these parts, and very recently. June was hot and unsettling. Gregory felt like he was being watched. Several times he noticed an unfamiliar car driving past his house, and one day he encountered strange individuals in the forest who, upon seeing him, hurried to disappear. Robert was also concerned. "I think Burke is up to something," he said when they met. "I saw him with some city folk. They didn't look like tourists or fishermen. Shifty types." "He's looking for Timber." Gregory nodded grimly. "He's afraid she might become evidence against him." "Or he just wants to profit," Robert added. "Do you know how much a cougar cub costs on the black market? Some collectors are willing to pay a fortune." They needed to act. Timber was almost 6 months old, a teenager by cougar standards. It was time to accelerate her return to the wild. Gregory and Robert brought several live rabbits to the cabin and released them into the enclosed space. Timber had to learn to hunt on her own. At first, she treated it like a game, but gradually her natural instincts took over. "Good girl," Gregory praised her, watching her expertly stalk her prey. You're a real cougar." In July, they began taking her deeper into the wilderness, each time to a new spot, leaving her there for a day or two, gradually accustoming her to independence. Timber adapted to the forest, learning its scents, sounds, and the habits of its inhabitants. The day came when Gregory realized it was time. Timber weighed about 100 pounds, hunted confidently, and needed human interaction less and less. She had to be released before she became too accustomed to people. "Let's take her to the Cedar Preserve Wildlife Sanctuary," Robert suggested. "There aren't many cougars there, there's plenty of territory, and she'll be supervised by the wardens." "No," Gregory shook his head. "They'll discover her quickly there, and questions will start. I know a better place." "When I was a young game warden," Gregory Stevens told his granddaughter, "I explored all the hills within a 100-mile radius, and I found an amazing place, a valley between two ridges, rich in game, with a river and caves. Cougars had been there. I often found tracks, but people almost never. Too difficult to reach." "And you took Timber there?" Elena eagerly awaited the continuation. "Yes, I did." Grandpa nodded. "But not everything went smoothly." On August 8th, 2008, Gregory remembered the date precisely. He and Robert loaded Timber, sedated with a mild tranquilizer, into a specially equipped cage on a trailer and embarked on a long journey. They drove almost all day, with the last 30 miles through rough terrain, risking getting stuck or overturned. By evening, they reached the spot, a picturesque valley surrounded by the foothills of the coast mountains. They unloaded the cage, placed it in a pre-selected spot by a stream where tracks of deer and wild pigs were visible, potential prey for a young cougar. "There you go, beautiful." Gregory opened the cage door as Timber began to stir from the medication. "This is your new home." The cougar emerged cautiously, sniffing the new scents. Her powerful paws padded silently on the forest floor. She turned, looked at Gregory with her amber eyes, and there was so much understanding in them that the park ranger's heart ached. "Go," he said, his voice hoarse. "Go and be free." Timber slowly moved towards the forest, casting one last glance back, then disappeared among the trees. "Well, that's that," Robert sighed. "Time for us to head back." But Gregory stood rooted to the spot, gazing where the cougar had vanished, as if wanting to imprint every second of that moment into his memory. Inside him, joy and sadness wrestled, joy that he had given Timber a chance at a real life, and the bitterness of parting. The return journey seemed endless. It was already dark when they reached a relatively good road. Headlights illuminated the narrow track, and all around them stood the wilderness, dark, impenetrable. "Look out!" Robert suddenly exclaimed, slamming on the brakes. In front of the car, illuminated by the headlights, stood Nathaniel Burke himself. Two other figures loomed beside him. One held something suspiciously like a rifle. "What a reunion, Gregory," Burke sneered, approaching. "We've been waiting." "What do you want, Nathaniel?" Gregory asked, not bothering to hide his dislike. "Just wondering where you and Robert are off to at this hour." Burke eyed the empty trailer. "And what were you hauling? Your cub, I presume?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Gregory replied calmly, though his heart hammered. "Cut it out, Gregory," Burke smirked. "The whole town knows you brought a cub home. A valuable animal, by the way." "And what's it to you?" "Just curious, you know." Burke spat on the road. "That cub wouldn't happen to be from the female shot in February, would it? The one the Wildlife Commission came about?" Gregory turned cold. Now everything clicked. Burke and his cronies, they had hunted Timber's mother. "You shot her?" Gregory's voice was quiet and dangerous. "And what if I did?" Burke retorted boldly. "Prove it." "Why?" was all Gregory could ask. "Why the cougar?" "Business, Gregory, nothing personal," Burke laughed. "Hide, bones, paws, all valuable to collectors, and cubs can be sold alive. You took one away, but we never found the other." "There was only one," Gregory gritted out, clenching his fists. "So where is it? Where did you take it?" "None of your business." Burke nodded to his accomplices, and they took a step forward. "Well, then, I guess we'll have to search ourselves," he said threateningly. "And you, gentlemen, will be staying here." What happened next, Gregory remembered dimly. Robert, without hesitation, slammed on the gas, forcing Burke and his cronies to jump aside. The car with the trailer sped down the forest road, bouncing over bumps. "Hold on, Gregory!" Robert yelled, gripping the steering wheel. Gunshots rang out behind them. A bullet shattered the rear window, showering them with fragments. "Go, Robert, go!" Gregory ducked, trying to spot their pursuers in the side mirror. Burke and his accomplices were indeed chasing them in an old ATV, bouncing over bumps no worse than a trophy truck. The distance was closing. "We won't get away," Robert gritted through his teeth. "Their vehicle has better off-road capability." Gregory thought frantically. Burke knew these woods as well as he did, but there was one road. "Turn onto Wolf's Hollow," he commanded. "Are you crazy? That's—" "Just do what I say." Robert yanked the wheel sharply, turning onto a barely visible track that veered to the right. The car bounced over mounds, the trailer scraping dangerously. They entered a narrow gorge, squeezed between cliffs. The road here twisted, climbed upwards, and then abruptly ended. Beyond was only a steep slope, overgrown with bushes. "Brake!" Gregory yelled when the precipice appeared ahead. Robert slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the gravel and stopped a few yards from the edge. "What now?" he asked, breathing heavily. "Unhitch the trailer and be ready for anything," Gregory replied, jumping out of the cab. The pursuer's ATV was already visible at the start of the hollow. Headlights picked out the silhouettes of trees and rocks from the darkness. Gregory quickly unhitched the trailer and placed rocks under the car's wheels to prevent it from rolling. He returned to the cab. "When they get closer, gas it to the side," he told Robert, "and I'll give them a surprise." Burke was very close now. Their ATV roared up the incline, clearly not noticing the cliff ahead. At the last moment, Robert swerved the car aside, clearing the way, and Gregory forcefully pushed the trailer down the slope. The heavy structure rolled towards the pursuers. What happened next, he only saw in the glare of their headlights. Burke noticed the danger too late. He tried to steer away, but there was no room to maneuver on the narrow road. The trailer slammed into the ATV's hood, pushing it towards the precipice. The pursuer's vehicle teetered on the edge, then slowly, as if in slow motion, flipped over and plunged down the slope, tumbling and crumpling with each impact against the rocks. "My God," Robert whispered, peering into the darkness where the vehicle had disappeared. "Did we kill them?" Gregory didn't answer. He looked down, trying to make out what had happened to Burke and his accomplices. 50 yards below in the moonlight lay the overturned ATV. There was no movement around it. "We have to go down," Gregory finally said, "to check." "Are you out of your mind?" Robert argued. "If they're alive, they'll finish us off on the spot." "And if not, then we're murderers." Gregory was already pulling a flashlight from the glove compartment. "Stay here. I'll go alone." He began to descend the steep slope, clutching at bushes and trees. Reaching the wrecked vehicle, Gregory shone his flashlight inside. No one was there. He let out a sigh of relief. "They got out," he yelled up to Robert. "They're alive, the devils!" Somewhere below, in the darkness, came the crackling of branches. Someone was making their way through the forest. "Let's go," Gregory said, climbing back onto the road. "We still have a chance to get back to town before them." "Grandpa, did you really try to kill those poachers?" Elena looked at Gregory Stevens with wide eyes. "No, of course not." The old man shook his head. "We just wanted to stop them. But in situations like that, you never know how things will turn out." "And what happened then? Did they track you down?" Gregory Stevens sighed deeply. "Not immediately. We got back to town in the morning. Burke only showed up a day later. It turned out they'd been wandering lost in the woods. One of his friends was badly crushed in the accident. They barely made it out. But the story didn't end there." Back in town, Gregory and Robert decided that the most sensible thing to do was to go to the sheriff and report Burke's assault. Of course, they'd have to explain what they were doing in the wilderness late at night, but that was the lesser of two evils. Besides, the poachers' names were now known. They drove to the county seat and filed a report with the deputy, a young sergeant who listened to their story with clear disbelief. "So you say they shot at you?" he asked again, looking at the shattered rear window of Robert's car. "Are there any witnesses?" "What witnesses in the middle of the wilderness at midnight?" Gregory retorted. "Well, what were you doing there at that hour?" The deputy pressed on. "I already explained. Inspecting the territory, there was a report of possible forest fires." The deputy recorded their statements, but Gregory knew, without solid evidence, the case was unlikely to move forward. And then there was still the question of the cub. If a serious investigation began, Timber's secret might surface. Burke appeared in town the next day, limping, with a bandage on his head, but alive and, as it turned out, full of vengeful determination. Seeing Gregory on the street, he hissed, "You're a dead man, Ranger. I'll hunt you down." Gregory just smiled. "Try it. But be warned. I have eyewitness testimony against you. About the cougar you shot in February. One statement from me, and you're looking at 3 to 5 years." Burke blanched, but quickly regained his composure. "Your word against mine," he snarled. "Prove it first." "I'm not planning to yet," Gregory replied calmly. "But if anything happens to us or our families, the statement will go where it needs to. I warned you." It was a bluff, but Burke seemed to believe it. He gave Gregory another hateful glare, then turned and limped away. All of August passed in anxious anticipation. Gregory often drove to the valley where he had left Timber, hoping to see her, to make sure she was all right. But the cougar had vanished without a trace, no tracks, no other signs of her presence. "Maybe she went deeper into the wilderness," Robert suggested, when they again discussed Timber's fate. "That's a good thing. It means she's adapting." Gregory nodded, but anxiety gnawed at him. Had Burke and his cronies harmed Timber? What if they had tracked her down? At the end of August, Carter from the Wildlife Agency came to town. This time not alone. He had a whole team of specialists with him, including a veterinarian and a biologist. "Mr. Lawton," Carter walked into his office without warning, "we have new information. Tracks of a young cougar have been spotted near the Bear River, a very unusual place for these animals. Do you know anything about this? The Bear River was several tens of miles from the valley where Gregory had left Timber, so she was alive and moving. First I've heard of it, he replied, trying to hide his joy. But it's good news. The cougar population is growing. Carter looked at him searchingly. You know what's strange? We have data on all cougar families in the region, but this young individual isn't listed in any of them. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere. Gregory shrugged. Perhaps she migrated from another area? Or from a family that hasn't been accounted for yet? Perhaps, Carter agreed. And it's also interesting that this cougar, judging by the tracks, isn't afraid of people. She even entered the area around a forest ranger station. Such behavior is atypical for wild animals. Young individuals are often curious, Gregory remarked. Or grew up near people. Carter looked at him pointedly. Gregory held his gaze. What do you mean? Nothing specific yet, Carter smiled. But we'll be monitoring this cougar, and if it turns out someone unlawfully kept and released her— He left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. Good luck with your observations, Gregory replied dryly. When Carter left, the park ranger immediately called Robert. Timber's alive. They saw her near Bear River. Thank goodness, Robert breathed into the phone. So it wasn't all for nothing. The autumn of 2008 was unusually warm and beautiful. The wilderness blazed with all shades of yellow and red, as if bidding farewell to the departing summer. Gregory continued his work, but now he increasingly visited the Bear River area, ostensibly to check logging plots, but in reality hoping to see timber. In late September, his patience was rewarded. While driving through the remote sections, he noticed fresh tracks of a large cat on the damp clay near the stream. The tracks led deeper into the forest, and Gregory, abandoning his car, followed them. Timber was found in a small clearing. She was stretched out in the sun, contentedly finishing off the carcass of a young deer. Hearing footsteps, the cougar instantly sprang up and turned, ready to defend her prey. Gregory froze a few dozen yards away from her. "Timber girl, it's me," he called softly. The cougar squinted, sniffing the air. In her amber eyes there was doubt, and then recognition. She didn't rush to him like a house cat, but she didn't flee either. She simply stood, watching intently. Gregory slowly sat down on the ground, showing that he posed no threat. Timber, after a moment's hesitation, returned to her meal, occasionally glancing at the man. "Good girl," Gregory whispered. "You're a real cougar." He sat there for almost an hour, simply watching Timber eat, and then meticulously clean herself, just like a domestic cat. When she finished, she looked at Gregory one last time, as if saying goodbye, and silently disappeared into the forest. That was their last meeting that year. Winter blanketed the wilderness with snow, and Timber's tracks were lost amidst the endless white expanses. "I thought that was the end of the story," Elena said when Grandpa paused. "Oh, no." Gregory Stevens shook his head. That was just the beginning. The spring of 2009 brought new anxieties. In town, people were increasingly talking about a cougar that was terrorizing the surrounding farms. She didn't attack people, but often preyed on livestock and dogs. Some had even seen her, large, with bright stripes on her flanks. Gregory knew it was Timber. Something had driven her from the remote areas to approach human settlements, and that could end badly. One morning, a breathless boy from a neighboring farm burst into his office. "Mr. Lawton, they caught a cougar. It got caught in a trap." Gregory's heart sank. "Where?" was all he could ask. "By Brown's Creek, where the old abandoned farm is," the boy rattled off. "Hunters have already gone there. They say they're going to skin it." Without thinking, Gregory grabbed his rifle and rushed to his car. On the way, he picked up Robert. "It's timber. I can feel it," he said, pressing the gas pedal. Burke, no doubt, decided to get revenge and profit at the same time. When they arrived at the abandoned farm, a whole crowd was already there. Several men from neighboring villages, armed with whatever they had, stood in a semicircle, talking excitedly. In the center, pressed against the wall of a dilapidated barn, a cougar thrashed back and forth. Her hind leg was caught in a huge trap, chained to a post driven into the ground. "Stand back!" Gregory yelled, jumping out of the car with his rifle at the ready. "Park service! Everyone step away!" The men reluctantly moved aside. One of them, Burke, grinned maliciously. "Look who showed up, the nature defender," he sneered. "Take a look at your little beast. She killed a whole flock of geese at old man Peterson's." Gregory approached, his eyes never leaving the cougar. It was indeed Timber. He recognized the distinctive stripe pattern on her face. She recognized him, too, and froze for a moment, stopping her thrashing. "This is a rare animal on the endangered species list," Gregory announced loudly. "Killing it is a criminal offense. Everyone disperse. Specialists will be here shortly." "What specialists?" someone in the crowd grumbled. "She's ruining our livestock. What if she attacks a person?" "She won't," Gregory said firmly. "She'll be tranquilized and taken to a sanctuary. That's the law." Burke stepped forward. "I think we should just finish her off right now." He raised his rifle. "Before she kills anyone else." Gregory unhesitatingly aimed his rifle at Burke. "Just try it, and you'll be next." The crowd froze. No one expected such a turn. "Are you crazy, Gregory?" Burke stammered, taken aback. "Pointing a rifle at a man because of a cougar? And you're willing to exterminate the last cougars for profit?" Gregory parried. "You're the one who set the trap, specifically hunting her." Burke spat. "Prove it." "No need to prove anything," a voice suddenly rang out from behind them. "We have witnesses and evidence." Everyone turned. A vehicle with the Wildlife Agency emblem was approaching the farm. Alan Carter emerged from it, accompanied by 2 police officers. "The trap is registered in your name, Burke," Carter said, approaching, "and hunting a cougar using traps is a criminal offense." Burke paled and lowered his rifle. I wasn't hunting a cougar, a wolf." "You can tell that to the investigator," Carter replied coldly, and nodded to the police officers. They approached Burke and politely but firmly took him by the arms. "What about the cougar?" Gregory asked, still not believing the turn of events. "The veterinarian will be here soon," Carter replied. "She'll be tranquilized, freed from the trap, given aid, and transported to a rehabilitation center, and then possibly released back into the wild, but far from human settlements." Gregory looked at Timber. She was no longer thrashing, but had fallen still, breathing heavily, watching the humans with apprehension and pain. "Can I stay with her until the veterinarian arrives?" Gregory asked. I have experience with wild animals." Carter looked at him thoughtfully. "You know this cougar, don't you?" he asked quietly, so only Gregory could hear. "This is the one I suspected last year." Gregory nodded silently. There was no point in denying it. "I'll explain everything," he said. "But first, let's help her." Timber spent almost 6 months at the rehabilitation center. Her paw wound healed, but veterinarians discovered another problem. An old bullet was found in her body, which periodically caused inflammation and pain. This explained why the cougar had left the remote areas and started preying on livestock. With her injury, it was too difficult to hunt wild prey. Gregory was allowed to visit Timber. Carter, after hearing his story, decided not to pursue a case about unlawful animal possession. "After all, you saved her life," he said, "and the fact that she recognizes you even after all this time speaks volumes." Burke received 3 years probation for illegal hunting of an endangered species. But the most surprising thing happened when the case went to court. Experts confirmed that the bullet removed from Timber's body had been fired from a rifle registered to Burke. Thus, he also received a charge for poaching committed a year earlier, shooting Timber's mother. In early 2010, Timber was finally released back into the wild. This time officially, with all necessary documentation and even a radio collar to track her movements. Gregory was there on the day they opened the transport cage, and Timber, after a moment's hesitation, stepped into her new life. She turned, gave him a long look as if saying goodbye, and disappeared among the trees of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. "Is that the end of the story?" Elena asked when Grandpa fell silent again. "Almost," Gregory Stevens smiled. "There's still an epilogue." 5 years passed. Gregory Stevens still worked for the Park Service, though age was beginning to show. He regularly received reports from Carter about Timber's movements. The radio collar had long stopped working, but she was seen by game wardens and captured by camera traps. Timber had grown into a magnificent adult cougar, established her own territory, and apparently found a mate. In the spring of 2012, camera traps recorded her with 2 cubs, well-fed, striped, and curious, just like she was as a baby. But the most astonishing encounter happened in October 2015. Gregory was checking remote plots alone. Robert had retired by then and moved to his daughters in Seattle. The day was damp and foggy, as often happens in the Pacific Northwest in autumn. Returning to his car after a long patrol, Gregory felt someone's gaze on him. Turning slowly, he saw her, Timber, sitting on a knoll a few dozen yards away. His heart skipped a beat. She had changed, larger, more massive, a true queen of the wilderness. But he immediately recognized her by the distinctive stripe pattern on her forehead and around her eyes. "Timber," Gregory whispered. The cougar watched him unblinkingly. Then she slowly stood and, without hurrying, walked towards him. Gregory froze, not from fear, he knew Timber wouldn't harm him, but from emotion. She approached, almost touching him, sniffing him from head to toe, just as she had as a cub. And then she nudged her head lightly against his shoulder, just like a house cat seeking affection. Gregory cautiously raised his hand and touched her neck. Timber did not pull away. For several minutes they stood there, man and cougar, bound by strange but strong ties of trust and memory. And then a soft growl came from the forest. At the edge of the clearing, 2 young cubs appeared, grown now the size of large dogs. They watched the strange scene warily. Timber looked at Gregory one last time, as if saying goodbye, and went to her children. Together they disappeared among the trees, blending into the greenish-gold sea of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. Gregory stood for a long time, watching them go, then slowly trudged back to his car. This encounter was a sign for him, a sign of the correctness of everything he had done. Grandpa Gregory fell silent, finishing his now cold tea. Outside, dusk was gathering, painting the wilderness in mysterious blue-purple tones. "And that's how we live, Elena," he finally said. "Timber is about 8 years old now. For a cougar, that's the prime of her life. Carter called recently. He said she's been seen again with a new litter of cubs. So it was all worth it." Elena looked at her grandpa with admiration. "That's the most amazing story I've ever heard," she said. "And is it real? Did all of it really happen?" Gregory Stevens smiled mysteriously. "Many amazing things happen in the wilderness, granddaughter, and not all of them make it into scientific reports." He rose from the armchair, went to the window, and looked out at the darkening forest for a long time. You know, old man Joseph, when he was still alive, always said, "The cougar is the spirit of the wilderness. Kill the cougar, and you kill the spirit." And he was right. These places without cougars, they're not the same places. "Grandpa, can I come to work with you?" Elena suddenly asked. "I want to see how you do your rounds. Maybe we'll meet Timber?" Gregory Stevens chuckled. "You're a fiery one, aren't you? Meeting Timber is a rare thing and a great honor. She's not a house cat. She won't come running at a call. But you know what?" He winked at his granddaughter. "I was just about to go on a patrol tomorrow. I'll take you with me. And who knows? Timber has a way of springing surprises." Elena smiled, her eyes alight with anticipation of adventure. And outside the window, the trees whispered to each other, telling stories of man and cougar, of trust and loyalty, of how true friendship knows no bounds between species. Somewhere deep in the forest, in her den, among the roots of an ancient cedar, Timber licked her cubs, and they purred, snuggling against their mother's warm side. Raised between two worlds, she taught her children not to fear human scent, but also not to seek encounters with people, except for one person, the one who had once saved her life and given her freedom. "So, you finally decided to tell this story." An elderly woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, placed a plate of pies before Gregory Stevens. "She needs to know, Shirley," Gregory replied, looking at his daughter. "She's 14 now. It's time for her to understand the responsibility of her decisions, and for those she's tamed." Shirley sat next to her father at the table. "She's just like you, Dad, just as stubborn and fair. I saw how she listened to your story. She didn't take her eyes off you." "Maybe she'll become a park ranger, too," Gregory remarked proudly. "She loves nature, animals." "Oh, no," Shirley playfully exclaimed. "One ranger in the family is enough. Let her get an education first, and then we'll see." Gregory chuckled, but didn't argue. He took a photograph from his shirt pocket, slightly faded, with bent corners. It captured Timber the cougar, still a teenager but already looking formidable, against the backdrop of the Pacific Northwest trees. The first photograph taken after she was released into the wild. "You still carry that with you?" Shirley asked, surprised. "It's like a talisman," Gregory replied, carefully putting the photo back. "A reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means going against the rules. But you have to be ready to take responsibility for it." He looked out the window, where the figure of Elena was visible against the darkening forest, talking on the phone with a friend. The girl gesticulated emotionally, clearly recounting the story of her grandpa and the cougar. "You know what's most amazing?" Gregory said softly. "No one in town ever found out the whole truth. Burke served his time and moved somewhere out west. Carter still works for the Wildlife Agency, He calls sometimes and shares news about Timber and her offspring. Robert, though he moved, still checks in every month about our girl's health, as he calls Timber. And you? Shirley asked. Do you regret taking such risks? Gregory pondered, instinctively running his fingers over a scar on his wrist, a mark from an unguarded play with a growing Timber many years ago. No, he replied firmly, not for a single minute. Everyone should do something real, something meaningful, at least once in their life. For me, that was Timber. That evening, after putting Elena to bed, Gregory Stevens sat on the porch for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night wilderness. Somewhere deep in the woods, tens of miles away, roamed the cougar that had once fit in his palm. Now, she was the wild queen of the wilderness, a descendant of an ancient lineage, a symbol of wild, untouched nature, and at the same time, living proof that sometimes the most fragile bonds turn out to be the strongest. Before going to bed, Gregory Stevens looked at the calendar. February 2023. 15 years since the injured cougar entrusted him with her cub. 15 years of an amazing story of man and cougar. Falling asleep, he smiled, imagining how he would take his granddaughter into the wilderness tomorrow and show her the trails he walked with Timber, teach her to distinguish animal tracks, and listen to the voice of the forest. And maybe, who knows, the cougar would come for a visit with her old friend again. And this time, she would bring not only her children, but also her grandchildren, a new generation of striped masters of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. Gregory was ready to wait for that encounter, for as long as it took. Thanks for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comment is very valuable to us.